All right, well, let me kick things off. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on the time zone you're in. I want to thank everybody for taking time to attend our webinar this afternoon or this morning. My name is Dave Bailey. I'm VP of Business Development with Security Architects, and I'm joined today by my close friend and cohort, Dan Blum, who I've worked with and known for many years. Some of you on the line may know Dan or have worked with him, and others may not, but Dan is a very seasoned security professional, 25 plus years of experience, has worked in numerous consulting and research organizations, including Burton Group, which was eventually acquired by Gartner, was a Gartner analyst for several years as well, and very well known in the research space, and has also been a consultant for many, many years, working in the identity security area. So we certainly want to welcome Dan. And we're going to be covering governance, one of the toughest subjects, I think, in this industry, since there's no uniform answer for governance. It's certainly not a one-glove-fits-all type of topic. So we're going to be looking at some of the different variations depending on, various company sizes and scope of the security function, and we'll be looking at that today. So I'd like to welcome everybody. Just a couple quick things in terms of the format. We will be going through quite a few slides in the presentation here. You should all see the entry slide on the screen, which states Security Governance 101, Choosing Models and Structures, so hopefully everybody's seeing that. And we will be doing a Q&A session at the end, and I'd ask that you hold off with any questions until the end, but we certainly would encourage you to type in questions as we go along, and we will be addressing them toward the end of the presentation. So, feel free as you think of topics and questions you want to ask in the presentation to type them in the chat box, and we will be looking at those toward the end of the presentation and doing our best to address those. So having said that, I want to introduce Dan, and we'll jump into this exciting topic here of security governance. All right, Dan, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Dave, and good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Security Governance 101, Choosing Models and Structures. I just want to start off very briefly describing sort of what this topic means to us, because we are a security firm, security consulting firm dedicated to helping organizations plan, specify, and develop security programs, policies, and technologies. And if you know a bit about our background, you understand a lot of our engagements are technology engagements, but governance is a very important thing for us, and no more so than now. It's more so now than ever. If you look up on our website, securityarchitects.com, you'll see that one of the current blog posts is the year the security dog caught the car, now what? And in the wake of the Anthem breach and security being on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and so many other publications, we're seeing a lot of attention paid to the topic and a lot of attention paid to us. And it's very important that those of us that are professional security practitioners, maybe coming more from the technical side, be able to relate to the governance side as well. A very interesting thing happened on an engagement that I'm working on with a hospital network. We are actually finishing this engagement, and we presented a very detailed roadmap with activities stretched out over 3 years, and we assumed that resources would be limited, as they usually are, and so we should leave time for the projects to play out, because certain projects like security information and event management systems or data loss prevention systems take a long time. Well, no sooner did that roadmap get up to the Audit and Compliance Committee of this hospital network, but the word that came down was, can you get it done faster? If we gave you more resources, could you get it done faster? Never in all my days have I had quite that sort of reaction to a security roadmap, and it's a reflection of the time we live in, where cybersecurity has got the attention. But if these are the good days, they won't last forever. We need to capitalize on this opportunity as security professionals, make the most of them, and leave lasting governance structures in place that will enable the funding that was spent in the wake of all this buy-in we get to improve the situation in a lasting manner. So all that being said, that's sort of why I care passionately about governance, I guess. We do a lot of other things. Most of our clients are enterprise security teams. We have some cloud service providers, other audiences, universities, government agencies, the usual suspects. Our areas of expertise are in cloud security, identity of privacy, cybersecurity, in particular endpoint security, anti-malware, those areas. We do security assessments, security workshops, either for education or facilitation and decision support. Our marquee offerings are really around security architectures, because we believe that if you don't have a destination in mind, any road will get you there and you may not like the journey. So the architecture is important. And we do custom consulting, RFPs, threat assessments, risk assessments, policy development, you name it, we've probably done it. But in the end, what we found is that at the root of many consulting engagements, there is a governance problem. And so even if it's a technical engagement, an Active Directory architecture, or a cloud encryption gateway selection process, or many of all the things that I've worked on, there's often a governance issue that's underlying the reason why the internal team didn't feel that they could quite get this project done without external help, either for an outside point of view, a fresh set of eyes, or extra expertise, but it's often a governance problem. And so this kind of gives me the problem statement for today, which is how can we help large or complex enterprises develop effective security governance structures and programs? So that's what I'm going with today. Now, enterprises face security governance as a complex challenge in itself, but they're also in the midst of a larger set of security challenges. The business environment today is perhaps unprecedented in terms of the level of global opportunity and the level of technology change and the influx of disruptive technologies like mobile and cloud and so forth. Enterprises are trying to adapt to the new environment, and they have lots of new tools and technologies that they can bring into play. But even as they do that, of course, compliance can be a break, and that can be quite difficult. In fact, I mentioned a cloud encryption gateway project I'm working on. This is a global company in the healthcare industry again, and their main bugaboo is data residency, because in order to attain operational effectiveness, they need to use modern customer relationship management systems in the cloud. You probably know which one I mean, Salesforce. But that runs into a lot of data residency concerns, because they also have a long list of countries where they will need to store personal health information for their customers. So it's just an example of business meeting compliance as a challenge and governance needing to be an answer for that and provide an answer for that. They also face a long list of threats. Once you get past dotting the I's and crossing the T's in the compliance report, you have to get down to the real business of having a security program that really works to accomplish what is the intent of all the regulations, hopefully, to prevent breaches. And you have to do that in the face of cybercrime, nation-state attacks, hacktivism, and all these other threats. And I think what makes things worse now than they were 5 years ago is a phenomena I call the erosion of assurance, with all the nation-state influx into cybersecurity space the cyber offensive developments, mutual espionage, and so forth. Pillars of assurance that we've relied on, like SSL, are shaken. The global telephone communications have been tapped. And there's no magic bullet anymore where we can deploy a technology and have assurance that this is going to keep our company safe from breaches. We have to have a comprehensive, systematic approach to security that covers all the bases in order to have a level of assurance in this environment. And that's why governance, which holds it all together, is so important. And we have lots of war stories. I won't go through them in detail now so much as to say that they'll probably come out now and then during the presentation, but we worked with a global pharmaceutical company once that did not have a CIO. Now, maybe I should be talking about the CISO, but of course, if IT itself is not unified, it's difficult for security to be unified. Their CIOs from different business groups would meet every 2 weeks and try to act like a CIO, and they were trying to establish technical standards in lieu of governance to make their business units work more effectively together and have some assurance. And in this case, the business units were working pretty well together, but often they're feuding. Often there's hidden agendas. Security may be perceived as Dr. No, and the answer to that may be shadow IT, where you have a failure of governance, where units are simply going out and doing their own thing in the cloud. And these days they can do that. They can just put the technology on the credit card. So now more than ever, you can't do governance by trying to scare the hell out of everybody, mandating a complicated solution and not telling anyone how to deploy it, which is a great quote I found somewhere that I thought I'd share. So let's talk about some security governance models that actually work. Centralized security can work, decentralized security can work, and matrix security can work, but they have to be deployed in the right way. In the case of centralized security, your security and operations will tend to work best in small organizations or organizations that have a receptive culture for that sort of command and control. Often military organizations, some government organizations, even a lot of commercial organizations with fairly streamlined business models have seen this work pretty well. On the other hand, a lot of organizations are kind of agglomerations of different businesses that have been acquired over the years, or they have different sites working under the same umbrella, but with a variety of cultures. They may be global and very autonomous because of the nature of the work they do. And so they're going to be decentralized, but they do have some global obligations. And so for that decentralized security to work, there's going to have to be strong accountability in things like compliance reporting and in things like following those standards that they have agreed to do in a unified way. And then often you have matrixed security structures, dotted line reporting. These sound good in theory, but they can be problematic unless you have well-articulated communication and control among the parts of the matrix. And that's something I'll be talking about a lot more as we move through the rest of the slides. Now, some other models, other names for models at least, have been suggested by colleagues. Hierarchical may almost be a synonym for centralized sometimes. Hub and spoke is another synonym for centralized. It's a simpler form where all the security employees or staff revolve around one leader, charismatic or otherwise. But it's where the organization is small enough or where the leader is able to exert a broad span of control, takes a certain type of person. And then in decentralized organizations, they often could be called networked organizations because I've seen groups in decentralized organizations work very well in shared communities of practice to exchange information, to franchise out activities and get a lot of things done. And then, of course, there's the composites which probably take as many forms as there are large companies in the world, where you're putting together centralized groups and decentralized groups within a larger matrix or something of that nature. So to go through a couple of these models, just show some examples. I'm going to talk for a second about the centralized model. I show it here revolving around a security leader. Let's call him or her a CISO for the moment. And the security teams all report to the CISO in this centralized model. You see some of them are sort of freestanding within the gray circle of the security department, and one team is embedded in the IT department, because in the case of IT, that's really what we're all about in security, is protecting IT, information security. So we're embedded, this team, in IT. But in the centralized model case, embedded or not, the teams report directly to the CISO, and they exert control not only through IT, but through diverse business units as well. And so that's sort of the idea for a centralized model. Now, in the case of the decentralized model, you have security teams, but they're sitting out with the business units. And they may be embedded in IT, or they may be separate teams. And there may, in fact, still be a CISO for a decentralized organization, but the CISO is typically in a very weak position, if the position's even present. Now, if you look at these two models, centralized on the left and decentralized on the right, there's some trade-offs between them. And taken to an extreme or put in the wrong context, they don't work all that well. A centralized model, for example, may be unsuitable for some business units. I've worked with some universities, for example, that have a lot of different colleges, engineering, liberal arts, they do research, they have hospitals, teaching hospitals, so they're very diverse. And the culture is for faculty and research to want a lot of independence. So too centralized of a culture is not going to fit in well with that type of environment. And you'll also find in any type of organization, commercial or government too, that there's always going to be units that want or need more flexibility. Maybe their business function is a little different from the rest of the units. And even in many cases, even when there's no logical reason why the units can't all operate under a common structure, sometimes it's hard to get them all to cooperate. They need to be given a certain amount of independence to innovate, and security needs to allow that to happen in their environments. On the other hand, if you swing the pendulum over to the other side and become too decentralized, you find that with many units operating their own security, the best practices, the good practices may be absent. We worked with an organization at one time that, although it had a single internet access point for a private network, they had elected not to put a firewall there, but to put firewalls down at the units levels. Now, we do recommend the use of network zoning as a technical good practice, but this was carrying it a bit to too much of an extreme. In some cases, when we looked at the internal audit reports, we found that there were not, in fact, firewalls in these units, but only routers, or units which had firewalls, but they hadn't gotten the maintenance releases for 2 years, or they didn't have certified staff from the vendor to maintain them. Not only is this lacking in assurance, but it also means that it's more costly, because you have to buy this gear from multiple vendors. You're not getting any volume discounts. You're not getting any economies of scale. So I would think most of us could agree that we're sort of looking for some kind of sweet spot between being too centralized, and too decentralized, aren't we? So could a global organization matrix structure provide that sort of sweet spot? That's an interesting question. I've proposed a model for a matrix here with a lot of dotted lines between the different functions as a sort of reference architecture for what a matrix security organization could look like. And if we view it from the bottom up, we have, again, 5 decentralized units, and I've chosen to name them after global regions: North America, EMEA, APAC, emerging markets. Well, these are the lines of business, and they have their own IT departments, but they also have some shared services, including some shared security services. These services are run by a group IT, a global group IT group, and it also would have a global security group. Somebody might want to mute their line. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise and don't want it to distract the audience. Thank you. So we've got our global group IT organization, information security organization, and it relates also sideways to sister group organizations for finance functions, legal functions, HR functions. And these handle those affairs that are common among all the units or between the units. And just so the executives don't get out of touch, reporting to the board of directors and the chief executives, there are various executive committees or advisory committees that handle security functions. Usually these are budget committees, compliance committees, risk management councils, and internal audit committees. So let's drill down into some of these different areas. In the line of business level, we have security happening both local within the business units, following security policies in this type of environment would be the intent. And also some security services may be implemented as shared services. So the lines of business are protected through these services, or they're protecting themselves, or they're being protected. They're making changes, they're being changed. They're planning the next evolution of shared services, the next rollout, the next desktop, the next release of an operating system, or whatever it may be. And there may be some cost-sharing arrangements or billing arrangements as well. These are all the things that affect a day in the life of IT at the unit level. Up at the group IT level in a matrixed organization, you have a group IT function and an information security function that's running the shared service, and that's doing assessments and providing support to the IT security groups within the units. And it's determining policy, it's defining the IT architecture, it's making the plans and roadmaps, doing the IT risk assessments for major projects. And it's interacting sideways with the finance team and the legal team for things like exerting security control for procurement, for example, getting sign-off on the purchase of a major new enterprise application. It interfaces with HR in terms of major background checking policies or termination policies or hiring policies, as well as bringing on the right kind of security staff that it needs to accomplish its own projects. And moving up then to the top level, we have the board of directors and the chief executives being given every opportunity and taking the opportunity, we hope, to have a bit of a hands-on approach to security governance, but at a level that's suitable for their busy, complicated lives. So we have committees supporting that board function and the C-suite functions. And these committees handle security-related issues. The budget committees handle security budgeting, financial reporting and financial control for security. Compliance handles regulatory reporting and reporting to the board of the compliance programs that are being implemented throughout the enterprise, and the compliance policies and whether they are adequate or not, whether compliance is being addressed over in the Risk Management Council, which should blend enterprise risk management with IT risk management and maintain some risk registers that roll up security dashboards from lower down in the enterprise, taking all the vulnerability reports and the surveys and the audits and so forth to roll up risks. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in another slide where I describe what some of these committees do. Now, the matrix, it draws a nice picture, doesn't it? You know, all those dotted lines, all those group IT functions, shared services, compliance audit, risk councils, all the right words, and it looks so logical, but often doesn't work as well as it should. And it's fair to say, I think, that most large organizations, certainly most large global organizations, have some form of a matrix. How could they manage otherwise, I suppose? So they have some form of it, but they may be missing crucial parts, or they may experience problems with poor oversight, transparency, and accountability. So they have to align that matrix properly, and that requires due attention to developing rational security charters and policies describing the authorities, responsibilities, and incentives for proper matrix design, and then actually living with those and carrying them out. So if you have a risk assessment process, make sure that units use it, and don't end up like one of our clients, a telecommunications company out of the Midwest, that we did an assessment for them and found, I think, 2,000 risk exceptions, if my memory serves me well. Well, that's got to be too many. And life in the matrix is not necessarily as simple as having a good, clean charter. I like to compare security governance matrices to automobile engines. They need frequent tune-ups, and they need oil in their moving parts. And so you're wondering, oil? What? I'm not following your metaphor. Well, communication is the oil that makes security governance matrix work. Making sure that the right kind of and frequency of communication is flowing up and down, so that executives are getting their quarterly issues, their quarterly briefings, or even weekly briefings when there's some kind of incident that has to be managed or some kind of project that has to be managed, and they're at the right level, and that the group IT is getting the right information up from the units, and so forth and so on. So I want to cover 5 questions which I put into the invite for this webinar, and these are: where should the CISO report in the organization? How should information security function be organized? What should the committee roles and responsibilities be? How do we communicate to executives about risk and security? And how can we bake security into day-to-day business practices? And I think you'll see more of how these different governance structures can operate well in the discussion of how each of these questions gets answered. So let's talk about where should the CISO report in the organization. This is sort of one of those eternal questions that we security professionals will be asking until the end of time, I'm sure. I think that the latest research I've seen suggests that in about 50% of the cases, the CISO actually reports to the CIO. And you might say, well, why not? I mean, it is information security. It's about IT, so why should it be separate from IT? And that is indeed a valid observation. and we've seen it often work quite well, particularly when there's good executive chemistry between the CIO and the CISO, and when security has enough of a mandate from the organization that the executive team, including the CIO, are all bought into. But we've also seen cases where the CISO, by reporting to the CIO, sort of has a conflict of interest. In order to get a good performance report, he or she should not make too many waves, not mess up the CIO's efforts to balance the budget or get the latest enterprise resource planning project done on time. And of course, in security, we don't want to prevent those things from happening, but we do need to make sure that security gets properly represented. So you have to look first in deciding where the CIO should report in an organization at how critical the IT function is to that organization. Because if the organization runs on IT, maybe like a financial institution, for example, many of them, or a technology company, that might be an argument for moving the CISO box on the org chart up a bit higher than the CIO. You could also look at the structure and maturity of the organization because it has to make sense with the type of organization that it is and whether it's mature enough to handle the kind of separation of duties that you're going to get when you put the CISO outside of the IT and perhaps have him or her deal with policy issues while leaving a security team within IT to deal with operational issues. So these are the different factors to look at. Size is also a factor. Organizations that are small might not dedicate a function to the CISO role, for example, at all. But once an organization gets to be mid-sized or higher, certainly, or if they're even if they're small but they have large revenues and complex IT landscapes, it makes sense for them to have some sort of CISO role. So now we look at how the information security function should be organized, and this is really pretty much the question: centralized, decentralized, or matrixed, right? And the first rule, I guess, is that the information security should generally follow the structure of the organization itself. If it followed a different structure, then it's not going to fare too well. So if you have an organization that's fairly centralized, then it may be fairly easy to overlay a centralized security department on top of that. Decentralized organizations and matrix organizations, which are just an advanced form of the decentralized organization, present another question about organization, because the decentralized ones, you still don't want them to go to that extreme where they're too decentralized and they've got no economies of scale, they've got no shared services, they've got no compliance reporting. You need to have some level of shared practice and shared knowledge and shared accountability reporting up. The roles and responsibilities of executive or advisory committees. So we'll look at three here: the risk committee, the compliance committee, and internal audit. Typically, at the enterprise level, the risk committee is concerned with more than IT. In addition to doing IT risk management, they're doing financial risk management, reputational risk management, all these different considerations they look at. And those all roll up into something called enterprise risk management. What I've seen often, though, is that in the enterprise risk committee, it's too high level. We just were working with an enterprise, and I was interviewing with the head of the risk council, and they have identified 50 risks that should concern their executives, and only 2 of them were related to IT. One of them, not surprisingly, was cybersecurity. The other was IT operational effectiveness. But you know, those other 48 risks, they all probably had a big IT dimension inside of them somewhere. And so the challenge for that particular risk management council is how do they bring broader IT risk management into their enterprise risk management? How do they generate the right level of reporting on risk to their executives across those 50 risks that they are concerned with without bogging them down into way more detail than would be appropriate for that level of the business. So the way you do that is by modulating the level of communication. Remember, communication is the oil of the matrix. By presenting some sort of summarized risk register up to the C-suite and the board level. And it may just be a spreadsheet, it may just be a slide or a page, but it has the major risks that have been analyzed by the committee from the IT perspective, rolled up into different categories. And it has status on each of those risks. And then there should be another slide which describes the projects that are supposed to be mitigating those risks. You can have red, yellow, and green graphics that show whether a risk is being managed well or whether it's increasing. And this allows the board to have a bird's eye view of the enterprise. And they can drill down if they want, because each item in the risk register should be supported by more detailed data that's coming up from the units below. But they can at least see whether a risk is being covered, whether it's being managed and analyzed, whether it's improving or getting worse, whether the project that's supposed to be handling this needs more funding in order to proceed on schedule. Sometimes these metrics that are used are called key risk indicators or key performance indicators, KPIs and KRIs. Now, the compliance committee ensures that compliance risks, your HIPAA, GLBA, SOX, FERPA, FSMA, all these different compliance regulations are factored correctly into the IT risk management, that they're getting the necessary risk treatment, that the compliance policies that are enforced throughout the organization are enforced, and that they're up to date. And so the compliance committee provides input into the policies, and it reports up to the executive board whether its compliance concerns are adequately addressed, and it also manages the reporting to regulatory bodies, make sure that's done properly, and signs off on compliance-related decisions. Finally, the audit committee would handle independent verification within the company that policies are being carried out, especially in high-risk areas. Sometimes, but not always, internal audit is a dress rehearsal for external audit that will be revealed to the public. And this is very important because without getting that internal audit, it's hard to construct a good high-level risk register that's verified. We often have seen companies that haven't done enough internal auditing for a while. And what tends to happen is that when they finally do fund an internal audit, some pen tests are done, some broad vulnerability tests are done, and that's when it seems like the sky is falling, and that's when they end up bringing in an external assessment team to drive a crisis program to figure out how the whole security environment can be improved. But to get to a higher level of security maturity, it's important that this be an ongoing process, that it not be a big crisis that happens every 5 or 10 years, but a series of little problem-solving exercises that result. The next thing is, how do we communicate to executives about risk and security? This is very important, and it should be a core competency for security leaders. and definitely for your career advancement. It's good to learn how to do that and to get or provide executive communication coaching for staff when needed. Executives also need to learn more about security basics, not the details of the technology so much as to understand what matters and how the pieces are fit together. So you want to be ready for your opportunity to give that elevator pitch or to present you know, a short half-hour briefing or whatever it may be at that level. The other thing is to speak the language of the business in terms of the business case. And that can be tough for something like security that doesn't actually always generate return on investment. Most traditional business cases are written in terms of return on investment, but for security, to make a business case, you often have to map risk issues to financial outcomes, hypothetical financial outcomes, and then map project issues into cost and benefit analysis and alternative analysis and so forth. But just because you don't have a strict ROI discipline that you can always apply doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a good business case for your projects. I think that's particularly important now when the funding spigot may get turned on in many organizations with security occupying so much of a place on the cover of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times these days, to make sure that you're spending the company's money effectively and that you've properly assessed the alternatives and allowed the executives to understand and make a good business risk decision and set the direction for the project, rather than just deploying a new gizmo or gadget that is supposed to solve all your problems. Because remember, there's no magic bullet. The last one we'll ask is, how do we bake security into day-to-day business processes? We like to say that security is about people, process, and technology. Technology is just one piece. And so really the function of security governance is to accomplish this baking of security into the organization. So this involves making sure that security roles and responsibilities are properly defined across all the organization's security-related processes, not just IT, but HR, legal, dev, ops. Oh, I have ops twice. I suppose it's important. Finance, vendor management, and across the different lines of businesses. You have to specify senior management accountability for the managers of those functions and to link each function into the matrix structure and to collect metrics on how well it's working. Where you know that something is not working well, as a CISO or a risk committee, you could make that something into a key performance indicator. For example, if you found that not all of the units have deployed a managed desktop, that they still have local admin privileges, or they still have bring your own device with no mobile device management or something like that. You could collect metrics on how many units or groups are still in the process of transitioning to the new managed future that policy has defined. And then another kind of metric that really hits home with people is to link certain critical security requirements to performance evaluations. Another way to bake security into the process is to determine those places where security sign-off should be required before a new project is started, before a new application is deployed, before a risk exception is granted. And finally, to conduct role and risk-appropriate awareness program and training so that people in these roles understand what to do about security day-to-day. Obviously, not clicking on links from emails from Nigeria either, but also something a little more role-specific. And role appropriate. So in conclusion, I'm pleased to have been able to give you this overview of security governance because I see it as the foundation for effective protection. We've identified 3 governance structures that can work. The centralized structure can work well in the right culture, the right size of the organization. A decentralized structure can work well, but accountability is key in order to not have it go to that extreme where it becomes suboptimal. And matrix can work well if it's well articulated and the right communication occurs across the different levels. So I think if you cultivate governance skills as well as technical skills for yourselves, whether you're in management or whether you're up at the CISO role, cultivating that governance skill so that you can function well in your part of the matrix and know how to work with the other parts and know how to escalate issues if appropriate or make the right arguments when you see something happening that's not happening the way it should. You can really help the organization benefit from this type of knowledge. And again, because it is the foundation of information security, this will help you stay off of the front page of the Wall Street Journal that you don't want to be on in a bad way. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Dave to handle the Q&A. I'll take a look at the chat window. I see some things have been coming in. Dave, what do you think?
Great, Dan. I appreciate it. This has been a great discussion, and we do have a few questions. And the first one has to do with actually the challenge of cloud apps. So one of the questions that came in is, in many organizations, cloud apps are proliferating across all levels of the enterprise, many times outside of IT's direct control. And IT, in many cases, appears to be losing control due to a highly decentralized app environment. What are some of the best governance policies to address this shadow IT challenge?
Well, we typically recommend that the organization do a couple things. One is to try and take an inventory of what cloud apps are popping up and where infrastructure as a service or other alternatives to IT are being used, and also why they're being used. Take a look at IT and has it been made clear to the business units that IT may have a alternative that the business unit should be using instead of its own instance of Amazon Web Services or Google Apps or whatever it may be. So taking that inventory to know what you have is real important. Secondly, IT should have a cloud security strategy that's bought off with the major business units and in tune with the business strategy as set by executive management. And then third, once you have that strategy where you know what kinds of things cloud apps should be used for, you can decide where you're going to give business units the freedom to go out and buy what they want, where you're going to let them buy it, but you're going to make sure that they buy it through a centrally managed service. And then third, to deploy some controls where you can monitor the activity and discover new cloud apps even before the survey tells you about them. So getting a cloud single sign-on solution, a cloud audit solution can give you that visibility.
Okay, great, Dan. Another question that's come in, do you really see information security being the same as IT security? Information is being handled in the organization in many different forms and not only in IT.
Well, they are two different terms, of course, information security and IT security, and sometimes when we could be talking about security in terms of protecting the computers or we could be talking about IT security in terms of protecting the information that flows through the computers and even out to the cloud and through the people that you interact with in your supply chain. So they are two different questions, but they're related questions. They're so related that I would tend to just think of IT security as a subset of information security.
Okay. Another question is how often should an organization engage in a full security assessment?
Well, of course, I'm a little bit biased on that question since we perform security assessments. But for the sake of the organization, I would say as often as necessary and not too often, which is a very vague answer, I admit. But remember what I was saying when I talked about internal audit about 10 minutes ago, that some organizations seem to kind of drift along in dysfunction with low security maturity for a number of years, and then something woke them up. They had maybe an internal audit that reported bad things, or maybe they had a breach, and now they need the full security assessment. So having to do a quote-unquote full security assessment was not a happy thing, but it was a necessary thing, right? So I think the answer would be to, if you haven't done one for a while, it's probably a good idea to put one on the schedule for the next year. Don't wait for the breach. Don't wait for the audit. And then having done one, actually follow the recommendations in it. Don't put it on the shelf. Follow the recommendations in it, and then hopefully you won't have to do another big one for some time, because you can do continuous smaller assessments, both internally and focused with your service providers.
Okay, great, Dan. Another question that has come up, do you see a trend toward organizations migrating away from the CISO reporting to the CIO type of organization chart and more toward a decentralized function where the CISO is reporting to somebody outside of IT?
Sort of. I guess I would say a little bit, because we don't have exact quantitative data on that question, but anecdotally, we have seen over the past few years that organizations are tending to assign the CISO more of a policy-related role, and often delegating operations to someone else. And so this is the separation of duty question that I alluded to earlier. And when you have separation of duty, when the CISO is in a policy role, often you'll see the CISO reporting to the chief operation officer or the chief financial officer or someone outside of IT. But that doesn't necessarily make the organization more decentralized, although it is a matrix function. Okay,
one other question here has to do with mobile, and it basically reads like this: mobile is a challenge for us. We don't control decisions over our telephones, iPads, notepads, and so on. What are some of the best approaches for incorporating mobile into our longer-term governance strategy? We see mobile as continuing to explode and proliferate throughout the organization, which is pretty much an out-of-control problem for us.
Yeah, and it's actually not necessarily a new problem, because even before we had Google Glasses and all sorts of Internet of Things, and smartphones and tablets are even getting fairly old now. But even before we had all that, we had laptops and we had people working on home computers. So we've had BYOD for a long time, bring your own device, for a long time. But it was easier to ignore it when you didn't have everybody reading their email on a cell phone during a business meeting in front of everybody else and talking about their devices, and they weren't issued by the IT. So you have to bring in the legal and the HR and the appropriate groups to look at what kinds of policies you can institute in that BYOD environment. And then you have to deploy the technologies that can support those policies, like mobile device management, like good technology or something like that to create business information containers within a personal device. Some of the technology is pretty bleeding edge, so we recommend starting out with the basics, like enabling remote wipe and passcodes on all devices.
Okay, great. And one other question, I'll read this out to you, and we might need to get some clarification on this, but the question reads, shouldn't information risk management be more interesting for a CISO?
Yeah. Well, I think information risk management or IT risk management, as distinct from enterprise risk management, that is the CISO's concern, is the information part of risk management, of course. So when I talked about a risk committee, I was talking about a committee that was concerned with all business risks, financial risks, physical risks, political risks, competitive risks, reputational risks. And that level of risk analysis does need to be conducted. And I think that the CISO needs to be interested in the broad spectrum of risks because they all have IT dimensions. But someone has to specialize in the IT-related risks, and that's obviously the CISO.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, Dan. Well, that's all the questions that I have. I don't see any more, and I know we're just about at the top of the hour here, so we pretty much run out of time. But we'd certainly like to thank everybody for joining us. We hope you found this informative. We will be doing a whole series of webinars over the next year, and we certainly will let you know about them as we schedule them. And we appreciate your participation, and also please feel free to reach out to us if you have additional questions or want to talk to us one-on-one. Our contact information is there on the screen. Security Architects, based out of Silver Spring, Maryland. And we, again, look forward to everybody participating in our next webinar, and thank you for coming.
Goodbye, and thank you so much.
Thank you.